Well, it's time for another isolation conversation, and I'm pleased to be joined by our athletic director at SIUE, Tim Hall, and it's our first renewal, our first I guess repeat conversation. But Tim, wanted to check in again and kind of just give everybody an update as we get into probably about week 5 now of the way things have gone. What's kind of changed, what's evolved since the last time you and I got together?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing I'll say is, as Beth and I have been talking in the house about the pandemic and, mentioning it's like the movie Groundhog Day. The kids said, "Hey, we want to watch that." And about 25 minutes to 30 minutes into the movie, they're like, well, this is nothing like what we're going through. And so I think the 2 of the 4 that stayed to watch the whole movie, the returns after the movie is that a pandemic and quarantine and shelters in place are much different than the movie Groundhog Day, but we tried to give them some perspective there. But, again, I'll say it's really interesting times, and I find myself repeating, this phrase or analogy of, knowing and remembering where you are and what you were doing when something really impactful hit. And, I've had the opportunity to visit with a number of our sports programs via Zoom and talking to our young people and, really giving them kudos for their resiliency in terms of transitioning to online learning and everything being virtual. And I wanted to wish them good luck as finals are right around the corner here and put a strong finish to the end of the academic year. But to say to them, look, in your young lives, we've all had personal situations or sadness or tragedies, but then there are some that are shared by everybody. And I told them the story about when I was in junior high, and I remember for a school project having to talk about this very topic, and my dad vividly recalling what he was doing and where he was when the Vietnam War started, and remembering vividly when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and how the whole country really felt about something like that. And I said, you're getting old when you remember things that happened. Like I remember when the first Gulf War started. I remember vividly what I was doing. I explained to them and told them the story about when 9/11 happened. And I said, and this is one of those markers in your lives that you will remember what happened during this pandemic and how it affected every fabric of society. And it'll put context around what's really important. And what's important is friends and family and relationships and health. And as much as we love sports, and I think we're all so fortunate, and I know, Joe, you and I have talked about this, that we get to do for a job what we really love to do. And kids are so much identify their sport with a big part of who they are. And so that identity is taken a hit a little bit because they're not even getting to work out that much or stay fit in terms of, working on their craft. But as the old saying, this too shall pass. I think it's so often used, but it's really true. I think this will pass. I think we'll figure out a way how to have a new normal. Things will be different. But just trying to give our young people some context and some reassurance that, I think I said on our first call, 2 pieces of advice that I was given is there's no immediate closure to anything. And my dad always said, number 1, and number 2, because of that, be comfortable with ambiguity. And he was really saying it to me in the context of being a leader. And because there's no closure immediately to a lot of various situations, you have to be okay in that space where you just don't know and things are ambiguous. And again, I mentioned, it runs counter to what you see on TV or what social media tells you, is that, one click of this button and you have all the answers to everything. And we just don't have that. Certainly, when the experts, the top medical people are saying we're not really sure if what we think is right. And so to say to our young people, look, there won't be closure on this immediately. Yes, when we do come out of it, things are going to look different, and so we all need to find a way to stay pliable like silly putty. And then they say, well, what's silly putty? And that reinforces that I'm really getting old.
So, and what I hope that people realize is that business does in fact continue. And as you mentioned, there might not be a lot of answers, but yourself and your colleagues in the Ohio Valley Conference, the other athletic directors around the country, you are talking about possible solutions and possible things going forward. And I know that, there's not a lot of answers yet, and there's not a lot decided. I want people to understand that there are still those conversations that are being had a lot by you and your colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have a call with my ADs, my AD and OVC colleagues later this afternoon, and business does go on. I think we're all at a point where we've done more Zooms than we ever care to do. But yeah, it's great being part of a league where there are such similarities and such congruency in terms of philosophical beliefs, in terms of the education of the student athlete, and education being paramount, but wanting our kids to be able to compete. And so we're comprised of institutions in a number of different states. Some states are a little more liberal than others in terms of how they're handling this pandemic relative to shelters in place and those types of things. So you have to be prepared and have conversations about, when we come out of this, what's our stance or our philosophy on, is it all 12 schools together, or if all 12 can't go, are we okay with just whoever is able to compete at that point? That's a tough philosophical question, but it's something that we have to tackle as a group. Looking at if we don't start until after Labor Day, what could contracted schedules look like for fall sports? Considering what is the absolute last date to where you could have a reasonable conference season culminating in a conference championship. And so, as I've talked with our young people and our head coaches, I've said, look, all of this is possible. I always tell people, initially you can say, let's deal in probability versus possibility. So all of these that I mentioned, I think are definite possibilities. Have they moved to the probability category? Not yet. Will I say that you'll see belt tightening in terms of expenditures? That's a very distinct probability, and it might even move to an assurance that that's going to happen, not only within our athletic department, our programs, and within the OVC. And so what I want people to know is how thoughtful we're going to be. And there's not one of us that wants to take opportunities away from our young people, but there is that possibility that the situations may dictate that. And so we're talking a lot, keeping our young people at the center of the conversation, and hopefully it'll go in a way that that everybody feels is the right way.
Conversations continue as well between you and Randy Pembroke, our chancellor, and
Yep.
the leaders in the university side. Obviously we see news coming out from the university, and they're planning a virtual commencement with hopefully an in-person commencement later in the year. But I know that, much like what you're doing in the Ohio Valley Conference, the university is doing, on a smaller level, as far as what can we best do and how are we best positioned coming out of this.
Absolutely. And, I think in a perfect world, not speaking for my colleagues or the executive leadership here, but I think as you read anything or watch, news relative to higher education across the country, there's a strong desire to have kids back on campus, and for a lot of different reasons. And I think the biggest is, the part that I always tell people of higher education that is not a commodity is the interaction and the student experience on campus and that involvement. That's the part that's not a commodity. And so there's so much that enriches the learning environment when you are physically on campus and you're attending classes, on the campus, and you're living in the residence halls, and you're involved in extracurriculars, and that's such an enriching part of the college experience, which is the real reason why we want to get back to normal as soon as possible. But that said, it has to be done in a way in which all of the constituencies who care about our young people, the executive leadership of the university, the executive leadership of the state system, and then certainly the board of trustees, all have to feel like whatever decision we make, we know we're taking the best possible position to have our young people be as safe and as healthy as possible. And I know those conversations are taking place daily. And I think I said, Joe, when we talked the first time, being relatively new to this university, but watching and seeing how they act in terms of decision making, and really keeping our people, our constituents, so students, faculty, staff, individuals who are day to day here teaching and learning and working, they have as their highest priority to keep everybody safe and healthy. And so, the larger question is, okay, for people to come back, what has to take place? Not just from an executive and legislative branch of either the federal or state government, but what does it look like for us? What do we feel? Does that mean that classrooms, that had 30 will now have 15? I don't know. In terms of social distancing requirements, does it mean that there's going to have to be significantly more hand sanitizer stations? Probably. Will there be mandates coming from executive or legislative branches in terms of, will people have to wear masks or not? Will there be testing that will need to be required in terms of people being able to interact in close circles? So much of that stuff is still up for discussion, and really it changes daily, for lack of a better way to say it. And so what I have said to our student athletes, who certainly have a really vested interest, especially our fall student athletes, I said, look, decisions when they're made, don't be surprised if they're at the 11th hour, because we're going to try to wait as long as we can, I think, to make decisions, so that we're not jumping the gun too early to say, hey, let's cut this or reduce the sports schedules right now. We're going to wait a little bit longer to see what happens. And I think that's in the best interest of everybody's, safety and health going forward.
One of the things, Tim, that is vastly different in the way things are going is recruiting. And men's and women's basketball has announced recruits here recently, but they're doing this without seeing, high school state tournaments or JUCO tournaments. On the flip side of that, these athletes aren't able to come to SIUE, walk the halls, see the facilities. So these decisions are being made in a vastly different way.
No question. And I think as I've listened to some parents talk about going through the process or not going through the process, and in a more traditional way, as you mentioned, and for coaches too, the first word that comes to mind, and it's really not a word, is guesstimation. I mean, there's some guesstimations being made as to, is this the right fit for me? As a mid-major that's growing, usually, if you can get a couple kids to sign early, that's great, which, speaking specifically for men's basketball, Coach Baroni did. And me personally, I think that's a sign that you're moving in the right direction when kids are saying yes to you and committing and signing before their senior year starts. But a lot of times, schools like us are looking at those late bloomers who haven't decided, and they want to maximize their recruitment. Well, that recruitment was taken away from them. So, in talking to Coach Baroni, he was talking about one particular recruit, and he said, well, we're not allowed to do any in-person visits. We're not allowed to travel as an institution. And, we can do Zoom with you. We've put videos together that I know your shop has helped with, Joe. So thank you, that really try to articulate and, what an experience on our campus may look like. But certainly that's not the same as coming and doing an actually in-person visit and saying, look, if you really want to physically see it, you can get in the car and drive up and drive around the campus, but there's buildings that aren't open. And so I think what you're going to see is coaches and kids making the best decision at the time that they feel is right. But, if, I'd be lying if I didn't say that in a year from now, it's going to be interesting to see the percentage of decisions that were made now that maybe weren't the best fit. And so will you see, kids saying, I'm going to put my name in the transfer portal because, boy, the campus is a lot different than I thought. Or, the facilities are different than what I was expecting them to be, or what have you. And so, that's a good example, Joe, where this has changed the face of how we do a lot of our work. And I think, once we come out of it, you'll see modifications to the way we do stuff as well. Now, I'm not saying at all that there's not going to be any in-face recruiting, but it's the dynamics of it all are going to be different for sure.
Yeah, no question about it. Tim, for you personally and for the wife and the family, is everybody still tolerating one another? And how are you handling now moving into more than a month?
We have our fits and starts. And so somebody asked me, have you and your family ever been all together every day, all six of you, for this long a period of time? And the answer really is no. Based on, certainly once kids are in school, we're in school and their activities and the responsibilities of my job and, the good work that Beth does, engineering all of us and our various schedules. But, we're getting through it. We bought a house with a pool, first time with that here. And so we opened it early, just hopefully we'd have some nice days. And so they said that the kids said the water temperature was up to about 68 yesterday. I'm not sure that was actually the temperature, but they got in and swam for a number of hours. So that gave mom a little reprieve to be able to focus on some other things. But, no different from us as adults, for the kids that can't interact even with other kids in the neighborhood. And, while the siblings love each other, I'd again be lying if I didn't say they get sick and tired of each other after once in a while. So we're doing good. A lot of board games, card games, watching different series on Netflix. We're becoming more proficient with that type of situation. But I think I mentioned this the first time, and there was an article in the New York Times that spoke of the reinvention of the family dinner. And I can't tell you the number of colleagues that I talk to as we're comparing notes and seeking advice and counsel from each other. How everybody's saying, gosh, it's neat to be able to sit down with your family and watch a movie. Or, we're eating more meals as a family and catching up and sharing stories and reminiscing about past vacations, or the type of things that you don't get to do because everybody's always on the go and all communications are sort of shorthand or abbreviated. So that's been good for us. And then personally with a new house, there's no shortage of yard work. So when I'm not on the phone or on a Zoom call, I feel like I have some type of yard implement in my hand, trying to make it as nice looking as possible. But we get through it. And I think one of the things that it's doing for our, said specifically for our kids is teaching them the value of how fortunate you are, and so you see the things that we're doing in our country to combat the pandemic, and then it puts more context around maybe what people in third world countries or others don't have. And so I think it brings a sense of realness to the struggles of those who are less fortunate, and the role that we play to try to be a good citizen and neighbor, and to try to help those who are less fortunate of us. So it's been neat to see that from our kids as well.
Final thing I have for you: are you watching The Last Dance, and how have you enjoyed or found that documentary?
It's interesting. I've watched. I've been watching it with subsets of the family, and the debate is alive and well. Is who's better, LeBron or Jordan? And being from Northeast Ohio and knowing some people who are closer to LeBron, I think they're both really good, and I think you can make arguments either side in terms of which one's better. But again, what's been neat for me is to share more stories in depth with our kids, especially the boys who are really interested, and to say, when I was younger, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, being from Northeast Ohio, they didn't play at Quicken Loans downtown. They played in a suburb that was about half the distance from where I lived in Youngstown, in Richfield, at the Richfield Coliseum. And my buddies and I would go, and they had $5 or $8 nosebleed seats, and we would go and purchase tickets. And believe it or not, when Jordan came to town, sometimes they wouldn't be sold out. And so I was able to show the kids a picture of, I may have been held by my feet by my friends to extend my body to get a picture of Jordan up close as he was coming through the vomitory. And, I think, that sort of relationship building, and being able to sit with my boys and talk about what was going on in sports, or why the Bulls were so dominant back then, and reinforce the notion of somebody like Dennis Rodman, that all you got to be good at is one facet of the sport. And he lasted and helped, because there were some games he scored 2 points, but he had 17 rebounds. And so having the time to really watch it and talk about it, in some respects, is a history lesson through sports. But yeah, it's been really neat. And again, I find myself saying, gosh, I'm older. Gosh, look at the uniforms they were wearing. That was a long time ago. So yeah, it's been really neat to see. And I can see why it's been so popular.
Forget the uniforms. What about some of the off-court apparel that some of those guys were wearing?
Oh yeah,
that I remember.
Yeah, right. Well, we all had a pair of those MC Hammer pants, and who said they didn't have them is lying.
That's right. My wife said, "Is Rodman working out in his pajama pants?" And I said, "Oh, yeah,
right.
Everybody was wearing those."
That's right. Right.
Well, I don't want to keep you much longer. I'm really glad that we got to catch up again and kind of,
Absolutely.
Reconnect. As I say to everybody else, I hope that, sooner than later when we do this, it's in the hallway, in the VC, or,
Right.
certainly courtside or field side, as we all should be and want to be.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Right. We'll talk soon. Take care.